say Jennifer, it's Jeff. Can you hear me?
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and for those of you in other time zones, good morning and good evening. I'm Brian Trombley, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another presentation in DCL's Learning Series. Today's presentation is an enterprise approach to DITA. Joining us today are industry colleagues Jeff Engel from Xerox Corporation and Nanad Fertula from Bluestream Software. I'm going to take just a few minutes to introduce those of you that aren't familiar with DCL as to exactly what we do. And then I'll turn it over to Nanad for a quick overview of Bluestream. And then we'll move on to the real reason that we're here today, which is Jeff's presentation. We should have ample time at the end of Jeff's portion of the presentation for Q&A. I know Jeff has a lot to cover. We've actually extended the webinar by 15 minutes for those of you that might want to stay a little bit longer and ask any additional questions. But please be assured, if you log any questions in that we don't get to while we're live on the webinar, we will definitely follow up with you with the answers to those questions. Jennifer, next slide, please. So just a quick overview of Data Conversion Laboratory. We've been in the conversion business for 32 years now. We've been successful because of our, back up one please. We've been successful because of our approach using technology and automation and infrastructure to make the process easy and efficient. We have a US-based project management team, and we leverage a number of offshore partners that have been working with us for many, many years. We're global ready and scalable. We do business on 6 continents and cover a variety of industries. We'll get into that in a minute. DCL tends to be specialist in complex projects, and that complex doesn't necessarily mean large projects. We certainly have our share of very large complex projects, but oftentimes there's small projects that are complex as well and really need the level of attention and detail that DCL approaches every project with. We have proven automated processes to ensure that the quality of the conversion effort is spot on, and our results are guaranteed. If there's any deviation from expectation based on conversion specifications, we're more than happy to continue working until we resolve any issues, should there be any issues. Next slide, Jen. In addition to the core conversion services, there's a number of other services that DCL offers. Audio video transcription, page composition for journals and magazines, consulting services, general consulting around content and content strategy, information architecture, style sheet development, tool selection, and a variety of other things. Content reuse analysis, which is key in a move to DITA. Our content reuse analysis services offer up the opportunity for you to see what your reuse opportunity is and how you're going to be able to get maximum value out of DITA. We offer digital publishing solutions, again, document and image conversion, ebook production. A lot of our work today is focused on delivering in multiple formats, and more of those formats include an ebook, whether it's Mobi for Kindle or EPUB for iPad and other tablet and non-Kindle devices. We, because of our process and methodology, companies hire us specifically for project setup and management. They might be doing the conversion themselves, but they might want us to put the structure around the conversion and also do the quality assurance on the conversion. We offer translation services and workflow analysis as well. Jen, next slide. So just a quick view at some of our clients, based on their logos, and you can see that it runs the gamut. Next slide, Jen. And so, primarily we're involved in publishing, government, defense, life sciences, transportation, aerospace, professional services, institutions, and technology. So those are the industries or industry verticals that we find most of our work being done in. Next slide. I don't see the slide yet. And now I want to hand this off to Nanad from Bluestream. Nanad, if you could please spend a few moments on Bluestream.
Thank you, Brian. So Bluestream database software is purely a product company. We're a Vancouver-based company in Canada. We've been around since 1997. We also have offices in Europe. So initially we were an XML database company, and about 7 years ago we transitioned into content management, and shortly thereafter DITA was open sourced, and we become very interested in that schema ever since. So Bluestream is very active in the DITA community, and we currently sit on the OASIS DITA Technical Committee. Next slide, please. So our flagship product is called Xdocs, and it's a component content management system, and it's a full-fledged XML content management system, meaning that you can handle any kind of XML. However, our strength lies in DITA support. So we've been making an impact in that market over the years. We have an open system, meaning that third parties who wish to do so can configure the system. So solution partners like DCL and Xerox most certainly do for end users and our mutual customers. The licensing is flexible, and we have a customer base that's all over the world. In many different verticals, and our customers really range from some very large companies to much smaller technical documentation teams. So we're seeing DITA really kind of come of age. And Brian, back to you.
Thanks so much. Next slide, please. Okay, so now the reason we're here is Jeff's presentation. Jeff, he's a solution architect from Xerox Services. He's been with Xerox Services since 2001, and he's implemented many document management and content management systems in various industries. Currently, Jeff is the lead solution architect for the DITA implementations at Xerox Services, and he's instrumental in developing and deploying DITA solutions for all of Xerox Services clients. Jeff, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I wanted to start off by giving just a quick background of the group that I work in at Xerox. I work in the Content Development Language Services group. We do all the documentation and translation for all of our Xerox internal products. We also have external clients that we perform translation services for and authoring services. So what I wanted to do today was really talk about 3 different implementations or types of implementations that we've done. The first one's going to be what we've done internally with Xerox, and then with in regards to DITA. And then also what we've done with a sister company inside Xerox with some inside the HR environment. Somewhere that's kind of a different environment compared to what we've done with the technical documentation. We've actually gone into human resources, and we're able to implement the various practices that DITA there. And then finally, to wrap up, we'll talk about where we've implemented with our learning and training group, and going through and implementing DITA in a learning and training environment. So just kind of give a general overview across all three of the types of projects that we've worked on. All of them have varied in complexity in regards to DITA. Some have been very straightforward, others have been scaled down, others we've really kind of pushed the limit as far as what we've done from a DITA standpoint. We've started from existing content, whether it's either in Frame, Word, PDF, Quark, any of those we've worked with and gone through a conversion process to get into DITA. And then finally, all the technology that we're using, we've used the same technology across all of our projects, where we've had a hosted environment that Xerox Services hosted, where our CMS is Xbox. And we've gone through and had authoring tools vary from Oxygen to some Word-based plugins as far as that goes. For our Xerox implementation, this is where you would really think of DITA in its kind of native environment, so to speak, where you think about how there's technical documentation that we would do for our huge printers and the software that goes with it. So in our environment, we've been using DITA for roughly 6 or 7 years, started back in 2007. From a staffing standpoint, we have information architects and authors that go through and actually do the day-to-day workings on the content. And then we have a global IA who is really the person that goes through when there's decisions to be made as far as how the content should be structured, or if there's a better way to do something. We have somebody that's kind of the head of that to help police that type of thing and keep the authors and the other IAs in line. And then we have a solutions architect, which is my role, that really is more of the technical piece. So when we have our IAs and our global IA talk about what they want to do with DITA and the types of ways to get there, then I come in and help from a technical standpoint to go through and help make that happen. Right now we've got about 14 different projects that we work with, and roughly around 18,000 topics or so. If you factor in all the translations and everything we have, that goes up to around 65,000 topics or so that we're working with. For the number of deliverables that we have per year, it's roughly 40 to 45 different deliverables that we do in about 18 different languages, and that seems to be growing every day. From our format standpoint, we go out to various ones, whether it be PDF, Java, HTML help, WebWorks help, all sorts of different formats that we go out into. As I talked about before, we use the same technology that we're using across all of our projects. From the actual DITA implementation itself, when we started out, we were in FrameMaker, in unstructured frame. And we went through and we converted everything into DITA, which what we found was that even though a lot of times the FrameMaker files looked the same, the authors had a lot of flexibility in what they were doing. And as soon as we started to convert, we saw a lot of places where a number wasn't actually a number, or the way that somebody did an ordered list wasn't always the same way. So we were able to go through and do that conversion and really start to standardize on how our content is pulled together. When we started to implement, we decided to take kind of baby steps. So we started off using just the initial kind of vanilla DITA at that time. We didn't mess around with specializations or anything like that, because we wanted to make sure that we had it up and running and try to use as much as the standard as possible. As we started going through and implementing DITA, we started to get into conditions and DITA files. And right now, across all of our projects, we've got roughly 40 to 50 different DITA files that range in complexity from just one attribute that's specified up to over 127, 130 different attributes. And when we started out with the DITA files, we started to go through and say, well, we're going to do this based on product. And then as we started to work through that, we found out that's really kind of limiting ourselves on how we're going to do that, because each product could change and that type of thing. So we took a step back and said, this is really better if we started to conditionalize based on feature, because every product would have a certain set of features, and we can take them in and out depending on what their DITA file is. As I talked about before, we have our group does translation also. So we're very fortunate that everything that we had from a translation memory standpoint, we were able to work with our translation team and have that converted over into a DITA type of translation memory, as opposed to the FrameMaker translation memory. As we go through, when we convert over to DITA, one of the things we decided to do was, from a training aspect, was not to involve the author specifically until after we had our content converted, or at least a subset of the content converted, so that when we did go through and train our authors, they'd be able to jump in and do and learn on the content that they're familiar with. So we would have them work on the same printers and the same type of documentation they've been working with the whole time, which made it a lot easier for them to make that transition. We also went through and created some design patterns. So when somebody said, well, how do I do this, or how do I put a table with a figure and that type of thing, we had all that lined out for them so they could just go to one spot and see, oh, okay, this is the standard of how we're supposed to do it, or how we're going to do it inside Xerox, type of thing. We also did publishing samples. So when we're going through and making updates to our formats and to our style sheets and things like that, we have a way to go through and make sure that we're not altering anything that has any ill effects toward our other formatting and things. And anybody that has any type of experience with that knows that that's a fun thing to do, to go through and update the publications. So after we went through and had that initial type of DITA implementation, we decided we want to go through and have some continuous improvement as we go through. So we set up information architecture meetings, like every week or every other week, to where we go through and all the information architects would get together and talk about the different scenarios that they've run into in the past couple weeks, or was there authors that came in and had questions about what they wanted to do or how to do something, that type of thing, and really go through and kind of net that out, so that way we could go through and have a standard voice as we're going back to our authors to make sure everybody was on the same page on what we were doing. And then from the authoring aspect, we brought them into our best practices, and which is kind of an interesting thing, because a lot of times what we do is we go through and say, here's somebody had a really good idea, and this is how we should implement something. On the other hand, we can go back and say, somebody didn't do this quite right, and it caused a lot of problems this way. So it was a way for us to share information, not necessarily to pull somebody out on the carpet, but really just to show that here's our standard of what we want to do, and make sure that we go through and get a standard offering as we go through the life cycle there. So once we had DITA implemented, one of the things that we kept getting pressure on is, well, what's it doing for us? What are the things that we're getting out of this? So the first thing we got was that we had a much more consistent look and feel. So from the Xerox brand, as you can see here, it kind of changes quite a bit, actually. So from the very beginning, what we would have to do is go in and update our FrameMaker templates, which is a bit of a daunting process. But now, since we're using a content management system and using DITA and publishing through the content management system, all we have to do is update the style sheets. Once those style sheets are updated, then we're just publishing straight out of the CMS, and everything has the standard look and feel. So you can see here, just based on the cover sheets, how much that's changed. We've also had some places where, in this case, is what a note looks like. So you can see at the top, the way that a note used to look is definitely different than what it is at the bottom when we're going through and publishing. Things like this that were painful to go through and change and frame were now easy to take care of. So then after all that, we had immediate results. Maybe not necessarily the immediate results that everybody wanted, but they're actually results that we could go through and be able to report against. So overall, we reduced the amount of content that we had. Basically, we were able to go through and find out where we had opportunities for reuse and start to implement that. So what we found was that before, when people were working a frame, and even as we started converting into DITA, there was lots of copying and pasting going on, which is not a bad thing, but it's just as we started to get into DITA, we want to make sure that we started to eliminate that duplication and start to get the benefits of the content reuse that we had. In addition, we were able to increase our publishing output, and our publishing times that we were able to go through, we were able to decrease those. So in times where we had products that were and had various variations of them. Some of them have up to 11 or 12 different types of variations for a product. When you take that times the number of languages that we go into, the publishing time was tremendous. So we were able to cut down our publishing time to be from 3 days down to roughly a day and a half, just from being able to go through and publish automatically through the CMS. And then also with all that, because the authors are not worried now about what type of styles and things you use in frame and all that, they're able to concentrate more on the content as opposed to the format as we go through. When we talk about results, immediately people want to know, well, how much did you save? Well, right at the beginning, we really didn't save a whole lot, to be honest. But what we did find out where we got the savings was in the next round of updates and the next round of edits and things that we did. And one of the things that we like to talk about is one of the program teams came back to us after we converted into DITA and said, it'd really be great if we could have a quick start guide to go with one of the products. Well, the quick start guide was nothing that we've ever had before. But because we had gone into DITA, we were able to take all those topics and create the quick start guide in just a couple of days, as opposed to taking a couple of weeks of what it would have taken in frame. So right away, we were able to see some good benefits to that. Also, by going to DITA, we're able to go through and do more with less. Over the years, we've been the documentation budgets have been cut from the different programs, and we're able to go through, and because of the reuse and because of the various things that we have, we're able to go through and with DITA, we were able to go through and still keep up with the number of outputs, but do it with less resources. And then finally, one of the things we have from a project reuse standpoint is that we're able to go through and get, in some cases, over 900% reuse for our products. And when you think about that, what's that really mean? And what we're saying is that essentially for every word that we have sourced in the repository for that project, we're able to publish 9 or 10 other words. So that was where we get into our different variations of the products and things like that. So we have a really nice reuse percentage there. So even though we've been doing DITA inside Xerox for since 2007, there are still things that we want to do to improve our environment as we go. One of those things is to expand our specializations. As we go through and worked with our content, we started to notice that authors were doing things differently with troubleshooting, how they displayed cause remedy, how they marked it up, and that type of thing. So what we want to do is go through and create a couple of specializations around troubleshooting, so that way when we go through and author a troubleshooting piece, that we actually have a standard for how it's going to be marked up. So then it's up to the style sheets or to the output that we're going to actually put it in the way that they want to see it. We also have some specializations we're going to do around figures and legends, just in the way that we can control how those things are put together and how they look and that type of thing. Around taxonomy, we have all our content in there. We can find it, but we want to make sure we can do that a little bit better and do it more efficiently. So we'll be doing more work around taxonomy for our system. And then also, even though we've been working with it for a while, we still have lots of duplicates in our system. And a lot of times what we come down to is that our authors, when they get down to the deadline, especially right at the beginning, it was easier for them to just do a copy-paste of the content as opposed to going in and actually putting in the content reuse and implementing that type of stuff. So we're going in and when we have our downtime, we're going in and trying to make that more cleaned up and more efficient there. And then finally, around translation, we're working to go through and get our translation group together with us more with the DITA and actually be able to send various small pieces of content over as opposed to sending the whole publication. But those are just a few of the things that we're looking to do next inside of our own internal implementation. So now, moving on to our human resources content. Essentially what we had was one of our sister companies inside Xerox Services is a HR consulting firm. And they'll go through and work with various companies to figure out or to keep them up to speed and in compliance with all the HR guidelines that the government brings down. And one of the pieces of documentation that you have to put together is a summary plan description, or an SPD. And what that is if you think about your when you get benefits, and what the SPD is what tells you what all your deductibles are, your co-insurance, and all that type of thing. Well, our sister company came to us and said, you know, we have a client that has over 230 of these SPDs that we need to put together, and we need to do it in about 6 months. So that was, before this, it was pretty much unheard of you would do that much in 6 months. So when they came to us, they said, you know, we need some sort of a solution that's easy to use. We're not technical writers like you guys are. We need to be able to go in and edit this content without having to use something that looks like FrameMaker or something like that. We need to be able to reuse the content. We know there's a lot of reuse in there. We're using Microsoft Word right now, and we're doing lots of copy and paste, and we don't know. We know there's a lot of reuse, but we don't know how to achieve that reuse. And then from a publication standpoint, initially they were just wanting to go out to PDF, but the idea is that not only would they be able to go out to PDF, but they'd also be able to go and they'll also be able to go out to HTML and various other outputs that they can use, so that their clients could have multiple outputs for all that stuff. And then on top of that, we needed to be set up pretty quickly, within a month or so, and we need to be relatively cheap, so that way we don't break the bank and blow our budget for our whole project. So as we go through and talk to them, we looked at it and said, you know, this really seems like DITA would be a good fit for this. So we went together and we decided to go through and work on this project, and we started to go through and look at the content and say, okay, what actually makes up an SPD? So when we looked at it, they had a lot of general sections. So you had your deductibles, what's covered, what's not covered, that type of thing. And there's also a lot of legal language that would be the same across all the SPDs, regardless if it was, regardless for whatever reason it was for. And then from a complexity standpoint, there's roughly 75 pages or so, but they can, you know, an SPD can range from 25 to 400 pages depending. So from a business need for their client aspect is that their client need to go through and update all these SPDs so that way they can go through and restructure their own benefits. And right now, at the time at least, not all the people that were receiving benefits from the company had a good understanding of what they were. So the job was to go through and update all their SPDs so that they can send them out to the participants, and then be able to go through and update their SPDs after that, or update their benefits after that. So this was with this project, from the client's perspective, it's been going on for starting and stopping for over 10 years. So if you look at how long it takes, and for various reasons for stopping, one is because it was just a huge project and they didn't want to get started and then other priorities would take effect and it would get stalled and that type of thing. And when you think about it, 230 SPDs is a bunch of documents to be able to update, especially to the detail that they need. Now, what's interesting, just as a side note, is that some of these SPDs were over 90 years old. So if you think about how benefits have changed since then, literally some of these SPDs had benefits relating to an iron lung and what would be covered or not covered with the iron lung. So as far as the actual content that was developed and the solution that was developed, we did the same type of thing where we hosted an instance of Xerox from Xerox Services, and then we gave them a Word type authoring tool. So now the users can go in and they don't really see the difference of what they're authoring. They just know that instead of doing a large Word document, now they're just working on a topic inside Word. And then we're having the data tags and everything associated with that outside of or inside the authoring tool, so they don't actually see it. We also did some information architecture on their content. You know, we worked with them and said, okay, what's the best way to break this out, and how does this content relate to other content and that type of thing. And then when we implemented DITA, we scaled down the actual DITA implementation quite a bit. For these HR documents, they really don't need any UI controls or win titles or things like that. They really just needed the basics of a content and paragraphs, numbered list, word list, that type of thing. So we're able to take a lot of the technical aspects of DITA out of that and bring it down to where somebody that's not a technical author could actually go through and work with the content. For this particular project, everything was in Microsoft Word, so we were able to go through and take the Word content and convert it over into DITA relatively straightforwardly. And in the process, we went through and did a reuse analysis. So as we were going through and converting it, we could see where the content was the same and be able to go through and combine all that stuff. So when the client actually got the system, we had taken all their content, converted it, and when we handed it off to them for training, they're working with their live content. So that, again, that's one of the things that we did that really helps bring the point home of how to work with it and how to structure their content. So when we implemented, we went through and created templates for them and said, okay, here's your basic template SPD or template map, and different maps for the different types of SPs that are in there. And said, here's where you can start at, and if you need to make new ones, you can base them off of this. And then we went through and created the setup in the repository, so they had all their template content, that they had their unique content, how we can set that up, and I'll show that here in a little bit. In addition, because we had over 230 SPDs, there was a tremendous amount of conditions that was associated with the content. So what we did was, instead of making the users go in and try to figure out how to use a DITA file, we went through and created a spreadsheet utility that would let them have all the attributes that they would use on one side, and then across the top would be all the different SPDs that they needed. Then all they had to do was they would just have to check what are the features, if you think back to how we did it inside the Xerox environment, what are the features of each of these different plans. And then just by going through and doing those check marks through all the content, they're creating their DITA files behind the scenes. And those were automatically loaded up into the CMS. So when they go through to publish, it was all ready for them to go. They select the right profiles and away they go. And again, also because there were so many SPDs or so many publications we had to do, we created a batch publishing tool. So that way, it was another way for them to set up multiple things to be published at one time and not have to sit in front of the system and publish each time. So once we did all that, when we were working with them, we decided how we were going to actually structure the content so we could go through and make it easy for them to interact with the system, interact with DITA, but also make it functional for us so that we could go through and still get all the benefits and everything that we have. So one of the things we did was combining the content. We took use of a lot of the draft comments. So in this case, this is an example of one of the topics that we had for deductibles. Now, in this case, there's 9 or 10 different types of options that we had for the deductibles. What was nice is that because it's all in one topic now, if there was standard language, we could just put that in one spot, and that would just go on through for all the different options that they have. Instead of going in and having 9 different places where they would have to update deductible information, all that could be updated in one spot. The other thing that's good about this is that it lets them go through and really change the review process. Because before, what would happen is they would have to complete the whole SPD and send that off for somebody to review, whether it be legal or the screens or whatever. Well, now what we can do is, because we're offering at the topic level, they can finish the specific topic, like the deductibles, send that off to somebody to review and get it back while they're still working on all the other pieces of the SPD. So we're really bringing that review process forward in our content offering, so that way we can be more efficient with that. Then when we get down to the actual review of the SPDs at the end, the only thing that they're really checking is to make sure that the appropriate options were put into the SPD. So in this case, you can see on the left, we've got an SPD that has the draft comments turned on, but just the content that we need is there. So if we look in between here, we've got our different headings there, or different draft comments, but there's no content there because that's content that was filtered out. So now when I look at the SPD and say, for this particular SPD, it needs to have option 3. I don't really care what option 3 is. I just need to know that option 3 is what's showing up in the text. So the review process when they're right before we send them off to print is more of a verification than anything else. And if you look on the right, it's the standard type of thing where it's a final PDF with no comments that are added inside the actual PDF. From a repository structure standpoint, we would have, the way we set them up was that we had our template content, and then we had our various folders for the different types of content that was there underneath it. And then we had, so you can see inside here, here's the 30 or so different topics that are associated with the administration information for an SPD. Again, it makes it easier for the users to go in there and see that this is the content this is for, and to be able to manage it that way. Then underneath that, we had, we set up different groups. So you may have some unique content that was for a specific group. So we would set up that unique content for the group, and then we would base all the actual plans off of that group. So you can see here's the same structure that we had for the templates is now underneath our specific group. And then we have our actual plan, which is our SPD map, is underneath the group that utilizes all the unique content for the group here, and then all of our template content. For our project results, it took us about 6 weeks to get the system up and running and configured and ready to go to start to import content into it. After we got the system up and running, it took about 6 months to get all 230 of the SPDs updated and out the door to the printer and to the final end users. And then once the system was actually created, or once all the content was actually in there, what used to take weeks to create an SPD, we were actually able to create a new SPD in roughly a couple hours because of the content that was reused, and because of the way that we were able to go through and pull everything together and use our templates. We were able to increase our efficiency quite a bit when it came to using the system or in creating the SPDs. Further results, if you think about all the content that we had out there, there's content that was standard across everything. Then we had content that was standard, or that was our option content. So like we showed with the deductibles, we have content that it had 5 or 6 different options, still more or less standard, but there was just different options for each one. And then we had content that was purely unique. So if you think about it, we had 50% that was standard across everything, 30 that was optioned, and then 20% for that was purely unique to all the SPDs. So in all reality, we had, once we went through and started working with them and working with how they wanted to structure their content, we ended up getting roughly 80% that was standard content in some form or another. So from a productivity standpoint, this was really a big time saver for them. We estimate it was probably at least a 30% reduction in their development costs. And then we also got all the standard stuff that you get with that, or with DITA. Everything from the standpoint where you don't have to worry about the format. You're worrying more about the content and getting better content developed, as opposed to worrying about if your bullets are indented into the appropriate spot. We had a lot less duplication of content. As we were doing this project, we got to the week before everything was due, and the legal department came back and said, oh, well, you need to add these 6 paragraphs to every SPD. Before, that would have been a royal pain. But because of the way that we structured it, we were able to go into one topic, add those paragraphs, and we were done. So, and then all we had to do is just republish everything. So it really was able to, when we get down to crunch time, it really helped them get all the last-minute changes in quickly and easily as we go through. Another added benefit was, because the system was topic-based, one of the aspects of the HR environment with these SPDs is that every year they have to be updated. And a lot of times, because these SPDs are relatively large and they have to mail them out, they don't want to do that, so they come up with this summary and material modification. And essentially, this could be a very short document. It just says, this is what's changed in your benefits over the last year, or this is an update to it. Well, what's nice is that we can build a template for that SMM that allows us to pull the content, the exact same content that we're pulling for the SPD. We can pull that into the SMM, and essentially we've created the SMM at the same time that we're updating our SPD. So now they don't have to go through and create a document strictly for the SMM, and then a couple years down the road, when they have to update the SPD and send the whole SPD out again, they don't have to go through and try to find all that stuff and then make the updates in the SPD. It's all made at one time, so that way when they get down to the end, they don't have to do any extra work. It's just republishing the SPD again. But they're still able to reuse that content in other formats and get the benefits from that. Probably one of the kind of the neater things that those able to come out of this too is that these SPDs are both for people that are working, currently working with the company, and for people that are retired. Well, one of the things I wondered about was like, can we make it so that the SPDs for the retirement SPDs, can we make it so they're in a larger font? Because as you're getting older, you don't want to necessarily have the 10-point font that they're using for everything else. So we have it like 12 or 14 or whatever. And I was like, well, yeah, that's something we can do pretty easily. And it was something that was virtually took no effort on our end, but we're able to get a good end user satisfaction with that because they're able to see that the SPD is better. And then the other thing that was nice about this is that even though we started out as doing just a summary at the SPDs, once we started going into the HR group and working with them, they're like, we could really start to use this for enrollment guides or other brochures and things that they use. And it's all the same content. It's just in different purposes for different types of outputs that they have. So we're in the process of working with them to figure out where do we want to put this content and how do we want to structure it so we can use it for enrollment guides and we use it for other places as we go through. And then the other thing that turned out that was nice about this is that it's really becoming a new offering for us to be able to go in with our sister company and deliver these types of HR environments with DITA and with a content management system. And it's really been something that has been really good for us. So finally, what I wanted to talk about was another project that we worked on where this time, instead of doing a technical documentation or doing HR, it's really around training. And what we had was we had a learning and training client where all their information was authored in Quark. And it was the way that they came to us was that they were looking at us to do translation for them. And as our translation group was working with them, they said, Quark is great and everything, but it's really expensive to translate. And then we started talking to them about DITA and how can we move this content into DITA and be able to lower your translation costs, but also give you all the benefits that you have when you go to DITA with the reuse and with the various outputs that you can go to easily and that type of thing. So as we talked to them about it, they started to think about how it was beneficial to them, and we started to work with them, and we started to look at their content a little bit more. And what we realized was that they have multiple types of files that they had. So for a particular training guide, they would have a student guide that would have all the information in it, and then they'd also have a instructor guide that virtually had the same information in it, but it was in a totally different document, or a totally different Quark document. So if any changes happened, they had to go in and change not only in the instructor guide, but also in the student guide and vice versa. So you can see how that could be a very big time expense just by going through and having to make the same changes in two different spots. Luckily for us, from a conversion standpoint, they did a really, really good job of making sure that they were in sync. But that also, like I said, that meant there was a ton of time that they were putting into that to make sure they were. And also they had everything was in English right now, and their main goal is to start to translate all their content so they can publish it out to various languages and open up new markets for them. Other parts that they would do is they have their training courses, and a lot of times what they do is they'll go to a client and say, here's our list of training courses, and then the client will say, oh, that's great. I want to have the first 3 lessons out of this course, 2 lessons out of this course, and 6 lessons out of this course. Well, that's all fine and dandy. In the Quark world, that meant a lot of copy and pasting and creating new files and that type of thing. And when they were telling us about this, we're like, that really sounds like a good place for us to implement DITA with DITA maps and submaps and things like that, and make it a lot easier for them to go through and create those custom courses for their clients. So the solution that we implemented with them, again, it's a hosted content management system hosted by Xerox services. We're using Oxygen for Authors as the authoring environment. We did a pretty extensive information architecture with them to get to use the learning and training specialization that's in DITA to really get that to do what we want it to do and massage their content that fit into that. And then we've gone through and converted, using DCL as our conversion partners, converted their core content into DITA content. So for phase one of the project, what we've gone through and done is to really go through and single source everything. Get it into one source of truth, get into a content management system, and get everything kind of on even keel, and then start going through and updating everything. And part of that phase is, once we got into the content management system, was to be able to go through and publish all their stuff out to the current PDF template, and then also give them the ability to go out to a SCORM output or an HTML output. The other thing we saw was that there was a really good opportunity for us to go through and get some reuse out of their content from the standpoint of the different formats that they were publishing out to be able to combine some of those and be able to get the various formats from one source, as opposed to having to update different content as we go through. And then the last piece was, we thought, instead of keeping the instructor files separate from the student files, what would happen if we integrate those two together? So that now when they're going through and creating custom courses, they don't have to go through and update anything. When they're putting those courses together, all the information is traveling together now. So to show you what that kind of looks like, if you have different sections of your source, so we have our student text and we have our instructor text. If we would put those together and put them inside one learning object, then all that content stays together as I'm moving it around everywhere. So you can see if we put our learning content and our instructor content and student content together, what we have then is we have a learning object that's got information associated with it. So we have here, the instructor will be talking about safety, and then the student has a little bit more detailed information. So then we decided, that's really cool, but what about if we started to get, what else can we put in there? Can we put in the objectives? Every lesson has a set of objectives. What if we put inside all of our content, maybe inside each of the topics, a list of possible objectives? And then to be able to go through and pull that when content's moved all around, be able to pull all that information together. And the same thing with assessments. What if we had, here are the questions that go along with this content. Instead of having them completely separate, what if we put them together with the content and had it available with it all in one spot? And then we even got it a little farther and said, well, what if we said, let's have our lessons, and inside the lessons we're going to have overviews, objectives, and everything all in one spot, so that now we can literally, when we get to these different courses, we can go through and just plug and play and be able to get a custom course out to a customer very quickly. So in this case, if we look over on the left, we have our template or our vanilla type of content. And we have customer A that has a certain amount of topics that they want to use, and customer B that has some of the same topics, but not all of them. So literally, all we're doing is going through and taking our vanilla map, and then creating a new map and just dragging the submap lessons to that new course map as we go through. Because it's all in DITA and because it's going through a publishing engine, we don't have to worry about renumbering anything. We don't have to worry about any of that, because it's all dynamic based on where it's at inside the tree. Again, saving them a ton of time and a ton of hassle when creating this custom content. So as a result of that, their content's a lot more fluid and flexible. They're able to go through and get a lot more bang for their buck when they're going through and working with their content now. They've got efficiencies in updating the course content, because now when they're updating student content, they can update the instructor content all at the same time. Their translation costs are going to be lower because they're in XML as opposed to Quark. And then, as we talked about, they had a better, greater ability when they're customizing their courses for different clients and things. And then over on top of all that, they also have a better control over their branding. So now all their courses have the same brand, look, and feel. And if they want to go to a different look and feel for their branding, they could do that too, all from one spot. So in summary, for all the different projects that we've done, and the three that I've highlighted here, we really went through the same types of processes. We had analyzed their current environment, what their processes were, analyze their content, what are the the current procedures that they're going through, how do they work with their content and that type of thing. Figure out the ways that we can go through to make it better. Do a conversion from whatever their source content was into DITA, and then also implement a content management system. And then went through the whole process of training them and getting them up to speed and going through their and supporting them as they go through on their conversion. So all 3 projects we've been very successful at. We've been able to cut costs and give them more efficiency and give them more flexibility in all of their content as they go through. So it's really been interesting as far as from the standpoint of being able to take the DITA structure and how we used it for how it was in the beginning, where we're using it with the Xerox technical content, and being able to move it into something not near as technical, into the HR world, and also using the same concepts and the same types of processes in our learning and training environment too. So thanks, and I'll open it up for any questions.
Jeff, we have a question from the audience. It is, for these projects, what things did you do that would ensure user adoption?
That's a great question. A lot of times what we had, especially from the Xerox side, was pushed from the top down. We knew that we wanted to be more efficient, and we had some key individuals in the authoring world that were ready to move on and could see the benefits in it. What we found from the HR side is that it's really the HR people really don't have the time for SPDs. Like I said, they're kind of a pain to work with, and there's a lot of compliance issues and things that you have to go through. And a lot of times the HR folks just really don't have time to do them. They're looking for a way to get out of doing them, and if they can find somebody to go through and update them, a lot of times they're happy to pass that off if they can just get through the review process. So a lot of times from the HR side, it's really more of the combination of switching over to DITA and the content management system, and the HR offerings that our sister company is offering to help them get through to help them comply with all the regulatory things that they're doing. And then the last one with the learning and training, that's a kind of an interesting bird, just because when you're in Quark, it's a very page-oriented. You know, I'm going to put this here, and put the graphic here, put the graphic down here, and then have it look all nice and perfect. And what we're finding, but that's fine when you're in English. When you switch over into your translations, that's where it gets a little bit more hairier, trying to get everything to lay out just right again. Well, the idea is that when we're working with DITA, we're able to take that stuff and let it flow into their templates and have a lot less, have a lot more flexibility as we're going through. And really, once we went through and for all of our clients, once we went through and showed them the benefits of what they can do, what they can get out of using DITA, as opposed to what they're doing right now, they come around pretty quick.
Okay, we have another question, Jeff. By having your publishing tools on the CMS server, did your organization save on licensing costs?
We saved from the standpoint of when we were for the internal Xerox side, we saved because instead of having each of our users having the publishing software on each individual machine, we were able to have everybody do it through the CMS. So we went from having a lot of single user licenses and we combined those into a server license and we're able to save some money there.
Here's a great one. What mistakes have you made along the way? What would you do differently?
You know, there's a lot of times it's just the growing pains of going through DITA. I mean, a lot of times what we run into with our clients is they're used to authoring big documents. They're used to authoring the whole thing at once. And being more of a technical person, I didn't quite understand that how an author could take a publication and it's their artwork. It's not a book. It's not a PDF. It's their piece of art that they work on to make it perfect. And I think that's where we, in the beginning, that's where we kind of stumbled a little bit, is being able to take that and to get the users more comfortable with going to DITA and what it can do for them. And that's where we're going through on these. When we go to our next projects, or to our external projects, and we're working with the users and things, we really sell them on the benefits that they're going to get out of it. and work with them and really give them that hand-holding that they need. Because a lot of times it's a huge mindset difference between going from working with inside of a Word document to working on just topics and things. So it's really something that we start to work with the users more and get their buy-in sooner in the process as we go through.
I think you may have spoken well to this next question already, but what's the typical learning curve to move to DITA methodology?
It's kind of interesting. With our internal Xerox stuff, I would say it took us a good 3 months or so for people to really start to embrace it and get into it once we start rolling it out to the authors. But to really embrace it and really start to have all the everything firing, I'd say it took a good 6 months to a year for all of our authors to really get going on it. What's interesting is that when we go out to our to the HR environments and into the learning and training content, it really depends on their ability to on what they were doing before. So a lot of times, because we're working in Word with the HR folks, then their speed on it's relatively quick. When we go out and do training, we usually do training for a couple of days to give them a very high-level overview of what DITA is and using XML. But it's really just showing them how to use the tools. A lot of times it's just they're coming up to speed on how they're going to author differently. So, and a lot of times what's nice is that in most cases they're looking for something different. They're looking for something that's going to save them some time and money and things. So they're a little bit more open to that change as they go through. So they start to pick up on it a little bit quicker.
Jeff, here's one specifically about the HR project. What level of granularity was there with reuse? Topic level or section level or something else?
We had various levels. Mostly it's at a topic level, but we also have, like you saw with the deductibles, we had various sections inside the topics. So it could be anywhere. Mostly it was mostly at the topic level, but it was inside the topics we got down to the paragraph level on a lot of things. On some of them we even got down to a phrase level. There was a couple instances where from one SPD to the next, it was based on your age. And one SPD it was 62, and another SPD it was 65. So we went through and essentially we just commented out we conditioned the actual age. So if you're in a specific SPD, you would have we'd show 62, and if you're in the other ones, then we would show 65. So a lot of times we would get down to that level, but most of the time it's in the paragraph or topic level.
Here's one, Jeff. How did you manage graphics, identifying them and finding the ones you needed?
Mostly from the graphics standpoint. In the Xerox side, we had several graphics, and we already had them identified from our previous content that we had. The HR content doesn't really have that much graphics, probably not really any, except for maybe on the cover sheets. And then the learning and training has quite a few graphics that we're working with. And again, it's mostly content that was all legacy content, so we didn't really have to identify them per se as much as just pass them on through with the conversion.
Great. Bruce would like to know a little bit more about the component content management. The question is it pure XML?
Yes and no. We store the XML content inside Xdocs, but we also store our images and everything else that's associated with the publication inside Xdocs. And when we go in, then I could probably give you more detailed specifics about that. But initially, it's all XML inside the system from the DITA standpoint.
Okay, and another DITA-focused question, which is great. What was your business case to adopt DITA when you could have chosen to use CCMS without it?
For DITA itself, the way that we looked at it was, we could go through and come up with a way. Everybody inside my group were like, well, we're all smart people, but we're not as smart as the rest of the people that, the hundreds of people that came up with DITA, and they're working with DITA and submitting new ideas and that type of thing. So it came down to why reinvent the wheel. We knew that DITA was pretty well baked at the time when we started to adopt it, and we knew that there was a lot of thought and effort put into it to figure out what are the types of elements and the types of attributes and that type of thing. So it was really, for us, it was easier for us to go through and adopt what others have already started to build on, and then move on into to our own specializations once we got to that point.
Okay. Peggy asks, was the content already topic-based before the conversion?
In some cases it was. For the HR things, they were very, they had lots of different sections, and it lended itself nicely to a conversion because each section was essentially a topic. And same for the learning and training, it was more or less topic-based. And really I guess most of our stuff was. Where we got into, where we came into issues, or came into different ways of doing things, was when, like for the internal Xerox things, we were used to authoring in a large document. So going through and having the authors were used to doing whole frame files and passing those around. So when we went to a more topic-based, there was that whole mind shift of writing in a topic as opposed to writing in a whole chapter or a whole book type of thing.
Here's another topic-related question from Susan. How did you handle cross-references in reuse topics? Did you encounter lots of roadblocks with cross-referencing?
Not really. We use quite a bit of conrefs and reuse and things. We haven't really run into too much issues there. One of the things that we've implemented is we have a lot of common topics, or topics that have a lot of common content in them. And what we do is when we have those in the CMS, we lock them down so that only a few people can actually update them. We have had issues where we bring in an author that was coming off a different project and they didn't necessarily realize the scope that the common content went through. And that's but what we found was that by keeping it locked down and keeping the subject matter experts as the ones that really, the subject matter experts on our side as authors, letting them be the ones that actually kind of filter out the changes to that really helps on keeping that standard and making sure that nothing gets updated or changed that doesn't need to be.
Okay, Jeff, here's a good one. What's the best scenario? Buy the tool and start using it, or start the training with our teams and then buy the tool when they're ready? Maybe you can speak to your experience there.
For us, and really in all of them that we've implemented, we've always had the tools and had the content had the existing content converted and put into the system before we really introduced it to the users. And that gave us a lot of, in most cases, like for the Xerox stuff, we didn't do all of our content at one time. We did it in a phased approach, but it really helps their understanding, the user's understanding, if they can see their real content. You can talk to them a little bit about the concepts and things of what DITA does for you, but until you're actually sitting there in front of the computer and working with it, it doesn't really sink in. And that's what we found was, it's a big enough switch to go to DITA anyway, but then to have to try to make people imagine how it's supposed to look or how you're going to convert it and really get it in there was too big of a leap. So by taking the content content they're used to seeing and then showing them what it looks like in DITA, it made our training go a lot easier.
Okay, we had several questions about translations in foreign languages, so I think this covers most of them pretty well. How much added complexity do translations bring to the DITA methodology?
Not a whole lot, actually. I think the biggest thing that we have is because we do our own translations, we're lucky from that standpoint because we could work with the translation teams. But they use translation software to factor to get the actual content out for translation and bring it back in and have it all inside DITA. I think it's actually helped quite a bit, and the benefits have definitely outweighed the cons to it. A lot of times what we ran into is that there's a lot of desktop publishing that was going on with the translations when we got them back. But because we had our templates set up, we were able to go through and publish all the translated content in the same way we published the English. And even with the text expansion and things, most of the time it will go through, it'll go straight on through, and you'll have the appropriate sizing and things like that. There are instances where it has made it a little bit difficult, and a lot of times what we run into is that authors will take their content in like a table and make it very, very pretty and very nice and cropped and tight in a table in English, and then when you translate it to, say, Dutch or German, it blows that out of the water. So there is that mindset of when you go through and do your translation, or when you're authoring, you need to author for translation also. So when you do tables or you do content, you're not making it specific in just the size for the English. You make it so it's appropriate for other languages too.
George asks, you've talked about the SPDs as documents, but what about repurposing content for online and mobile apps? Can you speak to that experience?
That's definitely where we're heading.
Okay.
A lot of times what they'll do is they'll take right now a lot of times they'll put it out to PDF, but some of the next phases that we're looking into is being able to publish that content out to the different portals. A lot of times these companies will have HR portals that they'll be able to go out to and being able to have that content kind of an on-demand type of environment is definitely where we're heading with that. And with our sister company, they've worked with various outputs, and they've got different web apps that we're looking into to see, or mobile apps, sorry, that how we can tie into that and what we can do there. So it's definitely on the horizon for us.
Great. Jane asks, did the writers go through minimalistic writing workshops before transitioning to DITA?
I know they've gone through minimalistic writing workshops. I think it was around the same time. We kind of did it. If anything, we probably did DITA before then, and then they started getting into minimalism. But it was really about at the same time we were going through.
Here's a question from Claudia. Who in your organization owns the authoring guide? It's interesting.
At that point, it's really mostly the IAs, the information architects own it. We actually store it on our content management system, so it's available for everybody right there when they're working with the content. But most of the time, it's the IAs that are going through and updating it and making sure that everything that's in there is still current and up to date.
Stephen is curious if you implemented multiple DITA maps per client, or if you looked at using a single DITA map by passing in client context.
We've done both. We've had one map that serviced out to 20 or 30 different types of configurations of things, whether it be Xerox content or an SPD or something like that, and then it was just the conditions that we had that supplied the correct content with that. And then other times we've gone through and had unique SPDs or unique maps for everything. And mostly from that aspect, it was mostly to, because we would have maps and we would go through and have specific cover sheet information and things like that was actually embedded inside the map. Other times we'd have the information that's on the cover sheet would be embedded in the content and we could pull it from there. So we've gone both ways with that. It does make it nicer when you can have the less DITA maps that you can have and apply and have as much reuse as possible at that level. It does make it nice, but at the same time, depending on the amount of conditions and everything you have, it does add a little bit of complexity if you have a lot of conditions there.
I love this question because I love a good WYSIWYG reference. Do you have much of a challenge with new authors trying to mark up for WYSIWYG, using elements to get a look or layout, and how do you break them of that mindset?
Surprisingly, it's not that bad. I've been really surprised because, especially with some of the HR folks, when they see it when they see an HTML preview, I'm like, oh, is that what it looks like? And I'm like, no, it's not going to look anything like that. I think once the users get over the mindset of that format doesn't matter, and that's when we kind of drill it into their head when we're training them, is that when you look at it, it's just one version of what you're going to see. It's not the end-all be-all version that you're going to see. And once we show them that here's your content, here's what you're authoring in, And even though you might have different spacing and stuff here, when they see the final output, they start to make that correlation together. And it hasn't been as bad as what I thought it would be, quite honestly.
This is a question also from Glenn, who asked the last question. Do you have any content that goes to both technical documents and training materials?
We do. We have a lot of times where we have, there'll be different types of system admin type things that would go into a training material, and other types that would go into just a regular system admin documentation, that type of thing. So we've got some places where we do that.
Okay, we have one more. Do you republish your documents after performing the cleanup?
Yeah. Usually what happens is we'll go through and publish it, and then find out there's a lot of places where it needs to be touched up, or a lot of times, quite honestly, when we're going through a conversion, there's a lot of places where you'll see stuff like on the next page, on the previous page, things like that, that really don't have when you're publishing with DITA, really don't have a good place, because of the way that everything's dynamic and how it could flow into an output. Those are the types of things that when we were moving from frame over into DITA, we had to go through and clean up that type of stuff.
And actually, Jeff, we have just one more. I think you may not have covered this in the previous question that I kind of put together from other questions about translation. Have you done any Japanese or other double byte implementations?
Not as of yet. That's one of the things that's coming down the pipe for us, but we haven't done any Japanese output yet.
Okay. And I think that's it on the question front.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today. Thank you again to Jeff and to Brian and Nadad. The webinar will be available on replay probably by tomorrow. You can go to dclab.com to pick that up, or it will be sent around by GoToWebinar. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.